Boom! What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakyan. Today, we have the pleasure of sitting down with the CEO of Conscious Capitalism, Alexander McCobin.
Alan, thank you so much for having me.
Boom! I'm super excited.
Me too.
This is going to be a great episode. So, Alex has been the CEO of Conscious Capitalism for 2 years now, and we're going to be talking about the good that capitalism is as this driving force for social change, for good change in the world, elevating humanity through business. Yes.
Hear, hear.
Thank you for coming onto the show.
Again, thank you for having me.
I greatly appreciate it. So your background's also cool because you were doing Students for Liberty in DC for 9 years and also at the Cato Institute for a little bit. So why don't we, you're born in Pennsylvania.
That's right.
And then did you grow up there until you were 17?
Yep, from York, PA, as in peppermint patties and barbells. Absolutely loved it there. Went to college in Philly and then moved to DC to work at the Cato Institute and then go to grad school at Georgetown. And I really had no idea where life was going to take me. When I was growing up, I thought I would become an attorney because I cared about principles like justice and morality. Then I realized what attorneys typically did, and so decided I wanted to become a philosophy professor. Then I realized what it meant to be a philosophy professor, and as much as I love reading and writing philosophy, I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. So I decided to go into organizing for-profits and nonprofits in order to bring about the principles in the world that I wanted to see.
Ooh.
And eventually that led me to conscious capitalism.
Yeah. That seemed like the perfect fit as you were looking into law, and then you're like, philosophy, how do I actually make the world better through these principles that I have through business? It seems like the right fit. What were you exactly studying when you were in DC with Students for Liberty, the Cato Institute? What exactly were you going through there?
So at Georgetown, in my studies, I was focusing on business ethics, actually, which helped lead me to conscious capitalism.
Business ethics.
The dissertation I wanted to write before I decided to stop out of graduate school was around a new theory of corporate moral responsibility based on the purpose of a business.
Yes.
A different way of thinking about why businesses exist than what is typically taught or articulated in the media. It was basically
almost always shareholders and money, and then bringing a product or value to the world as kind of the three things. But then where is the moral philosophy or the desire for social good baked into that? Why is it not there sometimes?
I think it's this over-economization of the concept of business and corporations themselves nowadays. So that the business itself is typically considered this black box that you ultimately get profits and revenue from, and that's the reason that they exist. But if you talk to entrepreneurs and ask them why they start a business, it's rarely just to make a lot of money. Sure, they want to make money. Everyone does. But it's typically that they see a problem in the world that they want to solve, or there is some value they want to instantiate. And they're looking to find a profitable way to create a sustainable solution to that. In fact, that's one of the best ways to create a sustainable solution, is to develop a business model around it. And when you talk to everyday people who maybe aren't running their own businesses, but they work for businesses, they interact with them on a daily basis, they don't care so much about the bottom line as typically taught in business. They're looking for their own particular kinds of value with them. And it really got me to rethink what is the purpose of business and how do we articulate the ethical requirements of businesses and people in businesses based around this intersection of interests and this concept of business as a value creator beyond just profit creator.
Yep. And so business ethics, I love that. It just seems like there's not enough people talking about that, because business is in many essences what drives the status of the world to have more food, have more water, have more healthcare, education, all these different things. So if this is kind of the foundational bedrock for flourishing, for societal flourishing, then it's really important that we instantiate some sort of ethics into it. But it's different for every business owner as well. But there are some core principles that maybe one should consider as maybe like consider providing your employees with health care. It'll probably make them and their families more stable, and therefore you can build a better culture with them as you move forward. So it's not like every business should give health care, but you recommend it. How do you go about something like that?
So before we get into specific applications, let's start at the foundations of capitalism and modern business, which actually had ethics baked into it from the beginning and a sense of a moral purpose to business that was kind of lost by mainstream business in the 20th century to a certain extent.
Yes.
Adam Smith, the author of The Wealth of Nations, considered the founder of free market capitalism, before he was an economist, was an ethicist. He wrote a theory of moral sentiments before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, where he articulates how human beings have a natural inclination to be concerned for one another and ought to be. And that actually laid the foundation for him to build a theory of economics on top of that, where people are concerned with the interests of one another, and by looking out for their own interests, they can better one another, and created the modern capitalist system that, or at least is one of the founding fathers of it intellectually. So it was always in there from the beginning, but it seems a lot of people forgot about that over time. And I think there are a number of reasons for that, including the over-economization, over-theorization of business, as we talked about before in the 20th century.
And the ego and the drive of the self, because like you said, with Alex Smith was focused on the other, that you can...
And the connection between the two. And there was this separation that came into place here. And that even came about, I think, when business ethics was introduced in business schools originally over 100 years ago, where the way that a lot of people talk about business ethics, I think, is inverted, where they see ethics as a constraint on the business process, that business itself is inherently evil and destructive and selfish, and you need ethical constraints to prevent abuses in business. When really, the principles of business are inherently good. It's based on voluntary exchange. It's about making people better off. Business is not competitive, as most people talk about, but actually very collaborative. So when you buy something from someone else, when you give your money to them, you say thank you at the store, and they say thank you in exchange for giving you something that they've created. There's this inherent quality to business and capitalism that is tremendous and can be unleashed. And business ethics, to a certain extent, can play a role in not only articulating, but living that out more by providing guidance for businesses to really understand how they create more value for everyone, how they avoid harming anyone in that process, and make the world and humanity itself better off from that. And so you're absolutely right that this is going to vary from business to business and business leader to business leader. They're going to have different instantiations of what we call the 4 principles of a conscious business. But it's all driven around the idea of having the intention of making the world better off, making everyone that the business touches better off, and doing as best as one can for it. And the last thing I'll say here before I turn it back to you is that this isn't a binary thing. It's not that there are good businesses and bad businesses. It's not that there are conscious businesses and unconscious businesses. It's that it's a spectrum. And there are those businesses that are trying to be conscious and do good and are doing a better job of it. And there are those that aren't trying to be conscious and aren't trying to do the right thing and are doing a worse job of it. And there's no perfect conscious business out there. We never say there is, and in fact, if a business says that they are conscious and they're perfect, then that's probably a red flag. We want businesses and business leaders involved in our network who are trying to do better and that want to utilize our community of business leaders to become better themselves.
So let's do 2 things. So first, let's explain that this is a consultancy, right? Then you guys go and collaborate with these businesses that want to become more conscious. They're aware that they want to implement more of these conscious principles, your higher purpose, stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, conscious culture, those principles. And then you guys collaborate with them on how to implement those into their business.
So that's one of the things that we do. We're a service-oriented organization that's really doing 3 things to elevate humanity through business. The first is build a community of like-minded business leaders. Because whether you're talking about business school or the media or just the social narrative, most people think the purpose of business is to make as much money as possible by any means necessary. It can actually be lonely for business leaders to have a different way of thinking about business, where they have a higher purpose, they're driven by these values. So we want to make sure that they're connected with peers who are able to support them in this endeavor, who have been through the same challenges that they're experiencing, can say, I've been there, here's some advice on what to do, and can just give them the encouragement to go on. The second thing we do is provide learning and development opportunities, which includes consulting work. It includes also case studies and workshops and just general educational opportunities for businesses to learn how to be more conscious. So for example, coming up, we've got business leaders in our network visiting 2 of the companies that have been actively involved with us for a while. Barry Waymiller, that has this everybody matters philosophy that is incredibly inspiring out in Wisconsin, and Greyston Bakery in Yonkers, New York, that has an open hiring policy where they, for 90% of their jobs, don't have any application or review process. They ask people to just write their name on a list, and when a job opens up, they go down the list, call people up and say, we've got a job, do you want it or not? And people get second or third chances in life from that, which just inverts the hiring process on its head.
Yeah.
But then the third thing we do also is actively make the case for conscious capitalism, which means communications. We want to help tell the stories of businesses that are making the world a better place so more people realize how business and capitalism can be this force for good, and encourage both those people already in business to adopt these practices, as well as to have more people go into business as a way of making the world a better place.
So we have the community, we have the learning and development programs, and we have the
communications.
Communicating the mission to more people.
Yep.
Okay.
Making the case for conscious capitalism to more people.
For it. Okay, cool. Those are huge. Those are all huge. The community is really important, and so are the learning and development programs and the outreach. All of it is. Okay, so now let's go back to Alex Smith.
Adam Smith.
That's right. Adam Smith. So, Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, wrote about it literally being thinking about the other. We need to have some sort of a connection to the other to help one another, and then use capitalism as a driving force for good in that process. Then, that was 1920s.
That was 1776, actually.
What?
Yeah.
Holy
long time
shit.
ago.
That was 1776?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow, that was at the founding of the US that time?
Yeah, they didn't even read the book at that point. It was published in 1776.
Wow, okay. And then when did capitalism really end up? I mean, the Industrial Revolution, but when did and then furthermore about the even the most recent iteration of the Conscious Capitalism book. So take us through that time period.
So the late 18th century was this interesting turning point in economics around the world. We still had feudalism in large parts of Western Europe and in the United States. We even had slavery still in the United States. The idea of moving away from a state-based conception of the economy that included feudalism and mercantilism, the aggregation of precious resources that would bolster the economy in most people's minds, was turned on its head by Adam Smith, who instead just reconceptualized how you even think about an economy doing well, which is based on the quality of life of the people in the economy. And when you take that standard, it requires you to think differently about how people interact with one another at the level of business and economic transactions. And that was one of the first key steps in coming to in creating an economy based on making everyone's lives better off. And it led to tremendous human flourishing. It didn't change things overnight. Clearly, a lot of other things had to happen there. But things around the world started to get a lot better. In the 2 centuries since capitalism was really developed, we've seen average life expectancy more than double from 30 to 68 years. We've seen average GDP across the globe increase by 1,000%. Literacy rates going from 16% globally to 84%, and poverty being almost extinguished. Over the next 50 years, we're actually on track to eliminate poverty.
Yeah.
And all of this happening when back in the 18th and 19th centuries, most economists thought the world couldn't handle more than 1 billion people. We have 7 billion now, and people's lives are still better off, thanks to the ability for people to freely exchange with one another, thanks to capitalism. But as much good as capitalism has done for humanity, that doesn't mean it's been perfect, and it doesn't mean that it is perfect right now. There have been significant abuses of business people over the years. There are those who are engaged in rent seeking and taking advantage of individuals, and frankly, businesses that simply haven't thought through a better way of doing things than what was given to them before. Again, remember, before capitalism, we had feudal economies. And most businesses, when they were initially developed in the 18th and 19th centuries, even into the 20th, actually look very feudal in their structures as well. That's this top-down hierarchy. One person's in charge of everything, tells other people what to do, and you have long chains of reporting and accountability. That's feudalism. New businesses and the idea of conscious capitalism is about not only embracing what capitalism means, but a better way of thinking about human interactions at a fundamental level. How do we actually empower people to have rewarding experiences in business as part of their whole life and bring their whole persons into business, which includes rethinking the way businesses are organized, rethinking the way that we do leadership, rethinking business strategy to include culture, and as we've been talking about, just rethinking why a business exists in the first place.
This history and the way that capitalism has helped enhance and enrich humanity through literacy and through poverty and through all these life expectancy, this is crucial. It's crucial for people to fully grasp and then to say that, good, okay, capitalism has helped us get there. Now how can we do some more of it consciously along the way? Okay, and then John Mackey wrote, CEO of Whole Foods, with Raj Sisodia, wrote Conscious Capitalism. What year did they write that? And then, tell us about that.
So Conscious Capitalism, the book, was published in 2013. John Mackey, the founder and CEO of Whole Foods, Raj Sisodia, professor at Babson University, tremendous individuals, co-authored that. And that was the book that really started Conscious Capitalism, Inc., the organization. We are carrying on what was articulated in that book, deepening the understanding and helping more business leaders practice it. But that book really was the result of almost a decade's worth of work to get to that point. There have been business leaders practicing conscious capitalism since there was business, since Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. There are business leaders who have understood that you need to have a higher purpose and stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership and conscious culture. There have even been other ways of articulating this that have been prominent before. But conscious capitalism really started to develop in the 2000s when business leaders like John Mackey from Whole Foods, Kip Tindall from The Container Store, Doug Rao from Trader Joe's, and others started to come together, and especially around the time of the 2008 crisis, say, we really need to articulate a different way of thinking about business. What the pundits are talking about, what has led to problems in society is really this misunderstanding and mischaracterization, misapplication of business. We all know what potential business has to make the world a better place. We need to share that philosophy with other individuals, which led to the authoring of the book, the founding of Conscious Capitalism, Inc., and everything that we're doing now.
And what were some of the things that they wrote about? Because they saw what happened in 2008, they knew what needed to be communicated to other businesses across the world. And so what did they write about, and then how did conscious capitalism kind of birth from that?
So I'll actually take this time to explain what conscious capitalism is, because we haven't talked about it much yet. What they really talked about were these 4 principles of conscious business that they then that they articulated in the book eventually and gave a name to conscious capitalism as the integration of several movements into one. But the first thing they all talked about was how the idea that the reason a business exists is to make as much money as possible is wrong. That's not why entrepreneurs create businesses. That's not what people who are the most passionate about businesses are concerned with. That's not what creates a thriving, long-lasting business as well. If a business is just out to make money, in fact, that's actually a pretty bad strategy for doing so. It's not that profit is a bad thing. Profit's great. It's just that profit is a means to some higher ends rather than vice versa. A good analogy is the concept of red blood cells for us as human beings. Red blood cells are great. We need them to survive. But just because we need them to survive doesn't mean that our purpose for existence is to create as many red blood cells as possible. It's the same thing with profits in business.
It's a means to an end. So then what we talk about a lot on our show is that Peter Thiel has talked about the benefits of paying CEOs little bits of money or taking as little salary as possible, and then keeping that fire really brightly burning under their ass to keep making the impact on the world. And even in general, Ron and I have a lot of conversation about the importance of, not owning boats or cars or watches or houses or any of this stuff. Just, renting things like through the shared economy when needed, but really just to take away from of that whole it's good for the economy thing, and rather focus on what's good for my spirituality or what's good for my essence or my being, because taking myself away from those materialistic possessions and not focusing on the amount of money that I earn through my paycheck, but rather the impact that I make on the world is really important. And so the whole thing about can this entity function to continue investing all of the money that it earns back into impacting the world, and then we just live and eat, and that's and take care of ourselves, and that's pretty much it, rather than trying to take the money earned to try and do something materialistic or that actually doesn't advance our purpose, our impact.
Well, just because we don't want to own a boat, it doesn't mean that we don't want to have a friend that owns a big boat. Just don't forget that. Just because we don't want it, it doesn't mean that we can't have it.
Or that we can rent boats when needed for a day. You can rent a boat for whatever, a couple $100 rather than wanting to own a boat, which depreciates as an asset, which costs thousands of dollars a year to manage. So the impact, putting the impact first as a business seems to be really crucial in not focusing on your personal bottom line.
Absolutely. And it actually has this counterintuitive effect of making your bottom line better off too. It's not that businesses that are conscious sacrifice profit. This is actually a way to make more profit, especially over the long run. I mentioned before I almost became a philosophy professor. There is this concept in philosophy called the happiness paradox, where as a person, if you want to be as happy as possible, the worst possible thing you can do is to make decisions based on what's going to make you happy. If you spend a weekend just trying to be as happy as you can be in that moment, you're going to be pretty sad and broke at the end of it. Whereas people who adopt some other higher purpose to their being, whether it's an ideal, family, or a cause, actually tend to be and are generally happier in their lives. So it's not that profit's a bad thing, it's not that happiness is a bad thing, it's that making decisions based on that and saying that's why you exist is both wrong and probably not going to actually lead to you being happy or profitable in the long run.
I like how you put this values first or these first principles idea. Again, it seems to be getting more and more baked into our show over time. But if you do go into life with an understanding that I want to, make the world better in this certain way, or that I want to do this every day with my time, and you go from that sort of value system first, then you're going to see this, the short-term picture, this moment-to-moment picture, and this long-term picture of what you're doing for the world, what you're doing for other people, why that's so important, rather than, like you said, just going for the weekend, just like, well, how can I be as happy as possible, and then try and just figure it out.
So what's great is that this also aligns everyone who interacts with the business to understand what they're trying to accomplish and get out of it, which leads to the second thing that these business leaders started to talk about, which is that typically in business, you're taught that a business is ultimately accountable to the shareholders, to investors. That's the only stakeholder that really matters. And that managers are agents of the shareholders and need to always look out for their interests. And as a result, created this idea that the resources in a business are inherently finite. And if you're going to benefit another group, say employees or customers or vendors, you must be taking away from the shareholders in some way, and that's bad. Well, that seemed and is flawed to everyone who is starting conscious capitalism. They had a different perspective that we teach, which is that instead of taking the perspective that one group is most important, everyone else is a means to that, and you need to make trade-offs all the time to support that one group, that the business ought to create value for everyone involved, and we can actually grow the sides of the pie that benefits everyone.
Yep.
So this is called stakeholder orientation, where businesses should look at every group and individual that they touch and strive to make them better off because the business exists.
Yeah.
And find creative ways for there to be win-win-win solutions to problems, so that by providing a benefit to a vendor, you actually help employees out. Or by helping the customers, you make shareholders better off. And again,
customers, employees, shareholders, this win-win-win.
Exactly. And again, it's not that shareholders or investors are bad or that you shouldn't be concerned with them. It's just that that's not the only group to be concerned with. Yeah. And you shouldn't try to balance off benefits to different groups, but instead find ways that everyone wins from.
Yep. And then if you figure out how to nail that relationship, you can grow the entirety of the pie over time even faster, and then end up, good. Okay, so then that's stakeholder orientation. I think we talked a little bit about the higher purpose. Mm-hmm. So that what we were talking about with the weekend versus having something of a value system. And then what about the conscious leadership and conscious culture within the organization?
So when people think about business leaders, they're typically thinking either about management, just controlling resources to maximize a certain end, or if they talk about leadership, they're often focused on one of two types of intelligences. Analytic intelligence, where you're able to make trade-offs and understand how to conceptualize the world in a way that grows the business, or emotional intelligence, which has been getting a lot more attention over the last couple of decades, where
Definitely.
people understand their own emotions, the emotions of others, and are able to lean into that to fully present themselves as a whole person. But there are two other types of intelligences that we think need to be brought into leadership that aren't talked about enough. One is systemic intelligence. So it's a lot easier to be an emotionally intelligent person in one-on-one or three-person interactions, bless you, versus with 300 people or 3,000 people, and finding creative win-win solutions at that level versus when it is just 3 people. That's a lot more difficult. It's a much deeper skill, but something that conscious leaders need to develop. And going even a step above that, spiritual intelligence isn't a religious concept, but the idea that leaders need to embody the values of the organization that they're a part of and model how to be a leader and how to really represent the business and be there to everyone else, to their employees, their shareholders, their customers.
Yeah.
And developing all of these intelligences leads one to be a conscious leader who is able to not just have an organization run, but thrive. And the corollary to leadership, which is necessary for a business to thrive, is the culture. Now, most business schools and people rightly focus on the business plan or strategy of the organization and spend a lot of time developing those. And that is important. You need to have a revenue model, you need to have a plan of action. But day to day, few people are referencing the annual business plan to make their decisions. They're not citing policies to decide who they're going to talk to get things done, or what are appropriate interactions or how they treat one another. That's all cultural. It's the interactions that people have when management's not looking or when they're not referencing the business plan. And that can be, and typically is, far more important to the success of a business than whatever its official strategy actually is. And conscious cultures are ones where people are able to bring their whole selves in, that develop authentic, trusting relationships, as well as accountability, so that people are accomplishing the mission and purpose of the business at the end of the day. And we want more businesses to really lean into that and think about what kind of culture do they have, and how do they make it as supportive a culture that creates this productive environment at the end of the day.
I really like how you said there's analytical intelligence and then emotional intelligence. I think that's a really important thing that we talk about on the show a lot, and that the more that we talk about that and really implement emotional intelligence into more of our engagements and interactions with the world and with ourselves, with the inner management and with collectivism, both, that's a really good way for us to progress in the future. I'm glad you brought that up, and then I'm glad you brought up the trusting workplace, bringing your authentic self to the workplace. That seems to be over and over again something that's crucial, that gets thwarted a lot, limited. And if we can build cultures where that is totally cool to be yourself, but to also be emotionally intelligent when it comes to learning things from other people, or to just being playful and dancing through work, but also being, very analytical when you need to get something done as well. So this is good. This is really good. I think that's pretty good. Is there something else about conscious capitalism that you want to mention before I ask you a couple of our simulation questions?
The only thing I would say that we've kind of touched on already is that conscious capitalism, it takes a unique position almost that says capitalism is great. It's done amazing things for humanity, but it can be better. When we lean into the human nature of business and capitalism, which is what distinguishes this way of thinking about business from most others, we unleash its potential to make humanity better off, to make everyone's lives better off. And so it's really about taking all of this to the next level to better people's lives.
Yeah. And I love it. It's like an iteration of capitalism, adding in this more goodness, this more collective goodness, taking employees, customers, and shareholders all up together over time. I love it. All right, so I guess the first thought that I think would be important to ask you about is, there seems to be a severe concentration of wealth that's occurring. And even though the Pinker argument's true that everybody's coming up over time, the severe concentration of wealth exacerbated by information technology seems to be almost speciating us into either the ultra rich or the ultra poor. What do you think about wealth inequality? Do you think we're just gonna solve it over time? What would be your thoughts around it, maybe a solution?
I think it's a real issue that we're facing today that has a myriad of contributing factors to this. But one of them that I don't think is discussed nearly enough is how unconscious ways of thinking about business has led to this kind of result. And oftentimes it's simplistic approaches to compensation and structuring payments and things like that have contributed to this issue right now. So, for example, CEO compensation across the globe is greater than it's ever been before, and the disparity between top paid CEOs and lowest paid workers is more significant than ever before. How did we get here when CEO compensation used to be much lower? Well, it's typically because boards, especially of public companies, want to make sure people think that they are hiring the best person possible, and a way to symbolize that is by how much they pay them. And in order to figure out what their peers are being paid and what expectations are there, they get consulting firms to come in, evaluate what standard compensation is. Okay, we're going to hire someone, and well, we don't want to get a B or a C CEO, so we can't pay them at the bottom of the scale. We have to pay them at the top. And it creates this ratcheting effect that over time has led to massive payments without people really reflecting upon, is this actually right? And it was based on good intentions, getting highly skilled executives to come in and run thriving businesses to help people out. But it's had this unintended consequence that no one has really railed back against that we need to address. The same thing goes with the way that we think about compensation, not just for executives, but everyone in companies. Oftentimes, we think in the shareholder orientation way of viewing business that, well, if you pay people more, that you're taking money away from shareholders, and you can't do that. Instead of what some businesses have actually done, which is show that by paying people more at the lowest levels in a company, you actually get better workers and you have better returns that delivers to other people, and that this is a strategy in business. We really have to think about how businesses can lean into their purpose, how they compensate people, being very thoughtful about what are the incentive structures that leads to inequality in compensation and then later on the inequality in the world, and how business can actually work to address this.
I'm glad that you looped that back into the way that business has potentially caused inequality in some ways as well. I think that's really important. As shareholders decide to maximize their profits and add an extra zero to the end of their paychecks, what ends up happening is there is a severe disconnect between them and the employees and then the customers, and then also the rest of the world that desperately needs the attention of that extra zero to try and actualize them. Maybe they then become your customers as well. Maybe they then become some employees within the organization as well. So there's this whole different way to look at things if one's willing to wander down that path. And I do think that there has been some ways that capitalism has exacerbated wealth inequality. It's exacerbated problems with the environment, with sustainability. For example, using plastics rather than biodegradables because we want to maximize our profit, because we don't want to pay the extra nickel or dime or quarter that we need in order to use a degradable polymer that can just more easily decompose in a landfill than plastic can. We wouldn't have the Pacific Garbage Patch. These repercussion-based society, the way that you just travel on a Navy vessel across the ocean, and then whenever you have garbage, you just toss it overboard into the ocean. That does not seem like we thought about that ahead of time. We just didn't think about that ahead of time. And these sorts of ways of thinking about things ahead of time with a design thinking mindset about how is the system designed is going to be crucial moving forward to prevent inequality, to prevent, this is the next question, how do the US collaborate with China and Russia and the Middle East and all these other developing areas of the world as we progress moving forward? How do you see potentially a communist authoritarian republic working with a democratic capitalist one?
So I want to touch on the environmental degradation point for a moment as well, because that's something that more businesses are starting to lean into, especially businesses that take a stakeholder orientation mindset. The environment is a stakeholder that businesses need to be concerned about as well. They need to make the environment better off than how they came to it if they're actually being a conscious business.
Yeah.
And Beforehand, I think there was less consciousness about the impact on the environment. There certainly wasn't an internalization of negative externalities that needs to take place, which led to pollution like you're talking about. And taking this stakeholder orientation approach, again, with the idea that we can actually make the environment better through our business and make ourselves better with it, is just a completely different way of thinking about it than what people were taught in the 20th century, this trade-off mindset. And that's what we need in order to move past these problems, in order to solve them going forward. And that may actually be a good segue into answering your question about how capitalist countries are able to work with authoritarian countries, which is to basically have this higher sense of purpose and a higher understanding of how business works and what a conscious business means, whereby conscious businesses should be able to work with people across borders and across different kinds of economics.
It seems to be ridiculously challenging to figure out how to get this free trade to actually be loving and caring across countries, across this big ocean. It seems to be this nightmare of a conversation.
And it's because people have this trade-off mindset still, where they think in order for China to do better, they must be taking something from us, instead of recognizing that when we have trade and that means when China does better, we do better as well. And even if they may impose certain restrictions, that's harming themselves as much as it's harming us. And taking that higher sensibility and that better understanding that we need to encourage interactions and be a model for what economics and business should be like in the world, that's really the way forward.
And it's interesting because this this mindset of wanting to be the leaders in the way that we advance democratic capitalism through the world is also being impeded / sidelined by this desire for conspicuous consumption. It's really difficult to tell people in the US that, hey, Apple and Google and these companies that manufacture the devices that you put in your pocket every single day, they give you the access to what you need, that they are going to need to start charging maybe $300 more per device because they're moving all their manufacturing back to the United States because they want to. It's good, you're providing something for people across the seas, but you're also creating this dependency on other people. There's all of the other conversations about where the materials are being mined from and how that's affecting those areas, and the kids that are involved in that process and the suicides that are involved at the assemblies. There's all of so this is difficult because people want their devices, people want their watches, they want their cars and boats, they want these things. And as we develop more and more of this want, it's impeding or sidelining our ability to figure out how to work together and to flourish as a collective as much as we flourish individually, and as much as when you're looking at the Earth from the moon, there are no fucking borders on the planet. And I'm really, really careful about how I speak about this because I know that China's doing a lot of things to the US that they kind of want to rebirth the Chinese amazingness into the world. And I think that's important, but it's also very important that the U.S., with our Constitution and our principles, that I think many people around the world think is much better than authoritarian regimes, is much better than dictatorial regimes, that it needs to continue making sure that the U.S. doesn't lose its positioning because all of a sudden the Earth could have another moment of dictatorship or of authoritarianism, and that's the last thing you want to do. When you're able to just wake up in the morning and walk out the door and have a good time getting a little bit of food, doing a little bit of work that you find meaningful or valuable, and that's all of a sudden taken away from you because now you have a top-down power that's telling you that you have to do something, that is very scary. So the globalization conversation is very nuanced, very complex, and I think that conscious capitalism has a lot to do with the way that we can move forward in a way of higher purpose, higher mission, higher values, more social good.
I think that's absolutely right. The answer to countries that are not practicing conscious capitalism, but perhaps the exact opposite actually, unconscious authoritarianism, is not to sink to that level and try to fight there. The answer, in order for the United States to remain a global leader, is to actually take this all-encompassing mindset that the United States has become a global leader by helping the world become better off, by being this thriving economy, which may have involved some unconscious capitalism for a little while, but can do even more now with conscious capitalism and lean into being a moral leader that has conscious businesses driving the economy, not just for the US, but for the globe, for being a model that others are able to embrace, and using that as a way to make the whole world better off.
I'm imagining right now a dictatorial regime somewhere in the world being overthrown by conscious capitalism, because people went from ground up. It's difficult to do that.
Who's going to be overthrown, if that's what you're imagining? What company is going to be overthrown? Can I ask you that question?
A dictatorial regime would be overthrown. So a top-down control structure would be overthrown by people, especially by some place like the United States, saying like, hey, these are our principles of conscious capitalism, and then other people around the world are like, whoa, I'm going to start implementing that into my business in that country, and then yada yada. And it's difficult to exactly explain how it would happen, but I imagine that being something of communicating of values across the world. Yeah, what do you think, Ron?
Other than Mr. McCobin, I haven't heard anyone else talk about conscious capitalism. And
yeah, it's actually true. Really the conversations that we've had on the show sometimes have to do with capitalism and with making the world a better place and figuring out how to do that. But to actually put the word conscious in front of capitalism and at least have that discussion and then propagate that discussion through the world is so crucial.
Well, if we don't let people like Alexander go forward, we're going to get rolled over.
If we don't let.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
For him to influence those in positions of power.
Exactly.
And it's not just about political regimes, it's about the businesses within those regimes as well that you were mentioning before. The way that you change those is by modeling a better way of doing business that actually makes people's lives better off, that makes the business better off as well by helping other people out. The more that we're able to spread this model, spread this message, the better everyone is going to be.
Do you think that we're alone in the cosmos?
I think that's a difficult question to answer. I'm not sure.
Do you think there's an advanced civilization that's roaming the cosmos?
I do see the mug behind you. Do you believe that we are in a computer simulation? And that is, from my philosophy days, a question that we would ask quite a bit.
Yeah. Are you going to answer that one or the cosmic one?
I'll answer both,
Okay.
Which is that I think the probability is there that we are not alone, and there's also a probability that this is not the end-all be-all, but I'm not really sure what it would mean for this to be the end-all be-all. This is what we have right now, and that's a pretty good place for us to work from and trying to figure out why we're here, what we're trying to make of all of this, and if there are other beings out there, well, we haven't interacted with them yet, but if we do, that's going to be interesting and also change the way that we think about why we're here and what we're doing.
Joke's on you, because we have a quantum computer in the back that's simulating the universe right now. Okay, what do you think's the most beautiful thing in the world?
Love. Hands down. Caring for another person or another creature just passionately and with that as an end in itself as much as yourself or more. How can anything be more beautiful than that?
I love Chinese food. What about that love?
And food itself is pretty good too, and that matters.
All right, and then how about what is something that you believe to be true that almost nobody else believes to be true?
I don't know if almost no one else believes this to be true, but I think it goes in line with conscious capitalism. But the idea that money is a good thing at its root. At its core, the concept of money is a representation of value. It's about value that someone has created that you're exchanging with another person in order to derive value from them and vice versa. It isn't always used that way, and a love of money without understanding that concept of value is problematic in the same way that pursuing profit as an end in itself is problematic, but profit itself is not bad. It's a good thing. It's a nuanced perspective perhaps, but taking the position that money and profit are good things, and we need to understand how they're good in order to lean into that, I think is tremendously important.
I can't believe that this was 1776 when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations.
Yeah.
I can't believe it was that long ago, and that the whole premise was to take care of other people, and that capitalism could help us take care of each other better. And that's kind of what you ended with there. And I'm really happy that Whole Foods, Container Store, these different CEOs have this important vision for a better world in conscious capitalism. It's actually, I pretty much rarely see a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's worker that's like pissed off or that's like angry. Actually, it seems to be a fairly good culture there.
Don't we support the Container Store? The
all
hammers
right.
we buy cost like $6 a piece or something like that?
Yeah. We do. We support Trader Joe's. We just got some Parmesan cheese from.
Where'd you get the pickles?
Also, Trader Joe's.
Oh, Trader Joe's carries those
Manhattan
now?
pickles, yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware. I thought just Whole Foods did it. I'm stoked
there
about
we
that.
go. Stoked.
Manhattan style. Way to go. Sonoma Brinery? Yeah, we need to
Sonoma
solicit
Brinery.
them for sponsorship.
Yeah,
after the
exactly.
show.
Yeah, no free plugs. No free plugs. Okay, so this has been a blast. Alex, thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you.
We greatly appreciate you so much. We appreciate conscious capitalism so much. We appreciate sharing this message with other people, building the community. We'd love to join the community of the leaders around the Bay Area that are discussing conscious capitalism.
Let's get you involved.
Let's do it. Let's get more of them onto the show and talking about it. And then let's share the message with more people around the world. So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. If you guys had a good time, give us a like, a comment, a subscribe. Smash that subscribe button, okay? We need to grow. We need to share this content with more people around the world. So join us in that pursuit. Have these tough conversations. Have these conversations with people around you. Inspire them, expand their minds to new dimensions. Join us on Patreon. We need help with our rent, with our production costs, with our food, with our electricity. Join us there so that we can continue being an independent entity. Thank you very much, Ron Vargas, our producing partner, and much love to everyone. We'll see you again soon.